there may be a couple folks who join a little bit later. We'll see. I'm really glad to get this going. Jess and I have been thinking about the value of coaches for a while now, and so we're interested in exploring that. And I'd like, first of all, maybe it would be helpful actually for those of you from the congregations to tell Nancy and Jim who you are and where you're from, kind of a little bit, just a, thumbnail of your context. And then I'd like Nancy and Jim to talk about Vibrant Faith, what Vibrant Faith does, because they're a resource to you beyond this conversation about coaching and their roles there. And so this would be rich. So Edwin, would you start?
I'm Pastor Edwin Weber. I'm here at St. Mark's Lutheran in Spokane, Washington. How much do you want to elaborate, Jane, on my context?
That's good. We don't want to
Great. I don't have to say anything more.
That's
Lutheran,
probably
Spokane, Washington.
enough, but I think your questions may tell them more later on. Okay. Julie, I'm just going across on my screen. Sorry to get you just as you're returning to the screen, but.
Hi, I'm Julie Griffiths. I am the office administrator and facilities manager. What's my title? I'm the office and facilities manager at First Congregational, and I've been a member of this church for over 30 years in Boulder.
Yeah, you really are. And Charlie?
Yeah, I'm Charlie Rassel, also from First Congregational. I'm a lay member, just going out as moderator and as treasurer, and like Julie, 30 years with the church.
And Chris, let's just stay with First Congregational.
Right, since all three of us are here. I'm Chris, and I'm the senior minister here at First Congregational Church, UCC Boulder, and I've been here for 6 years.
And Chris, you have had a pastoral coach, is that correct?
We're working with 2 coaches right now. Yeah. I have a personal clergy coach who's working with me on our visioning process, and also as I'm getting ready to go on sabbatical. And I have a project that he's helping me with, just think about. And then also we are, as we are emerging from COVID, we're in a strategic planning process, doing some visioning and coming up. Really, we've identified our priorities for the next 3 to 5 years, and they're all, related to vocation in one way or another. And we will be setting some goals starting tonight, and then developing some strategies for when I get back. We will be implementing them when I get back from sabbatical next fall.
Thank you. Anne.
Hi, I'm Ann Lowther, and I'm with Nativity Orthodox Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I'm a lay leader. I've been with the church about 16 years.
Thank you. Jane?
I'm Jane Schmitz from Pax Christi Catholic Community in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. And I'm a lay leader, and been with the faith community for 25 years, I think, 27 years.
Yeah. Thank you, Jane.
You're welcome.
Jamie?
Jamie Howison. I'm with St. Benedict's Table in Winnipeg, which is very cold today. It'll break. And I am the rector of the community here. I was the founding pastor as well, starting in 2004. So we're coming up to our 20-year anniversary in another couple.
Thank you, Jamie. I think you all can hear like how different these congregations are in all kinds of ways. Size, duration, denominational differences. So, and Mike Byron, we're just introducing ourselves.
I'm Mike Byron. I'm here at Pax Christi in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, Pax Christi Catholic. And that's what I got.
All right, thank you. He's the pastor there.
Okay.
He and Jane are at the same congregation. So, so let's get to know Nancy and Jim a little bit. If one of you would just choose to go first and kind of explain the ministry of Vibrant Faith first, which I think people probably are maybe not so familiar with, your role there, and then your connection with the Call to Lives of Meaning and Purpose initiative and how that has kind of shaped you as an institution and your understanding of your work.
Yeah. Why don't you go first, Nancy?
I was
Give
just
us
going
all
to say,
the-
Jim, do you mind if
Oh,
I go first? And you can bring up the rear. So
Yeah.
Jim is our director of coaching, and we have developed a coaching school out of this grant process. So so he can bring up the rear and really focus on coaching. But hi everyone, I'm Nancy Going. I was the executive director of Vibrant Faith for 6 years, and then a year ago laid that down, and we got another amazing person to be the executive director instead of me. And now I have this awesome role as director of research and resources, which is basically grant work. And we were one of the 15 calling hubs that received a grant. So just like the Collegeville Institute, we also received a grant to pursue insights and helping congregations take on this theme of calling and vocation and understand it and absorb it and bring it into their life of faith and community in new ways. And we just finished, so we wrote a shorter grant. So we just finished our work with our churches in April. And I have already been able to see the impact in many ways of calling and vocation as the churches took this up in new ways, just in their lives together. So our grant was called Creating a Culture of Calling. And that's what we really tried to help them do, is to change the culture of their church by using the theme of calling. And as Jane mentioned, we discovered in a couple ways as an organization that this theme of calling was something that that should have been front and center to our mission and ministry for the 25 years we've existed, and it really hadn't been. And we are so excited about the things we discovered about the impact that building life together around this theme of how is God calling and how is God calling now, what a difference that makes for the life of an organization. Especially, however, our work is to help the church recognize the power and impact of parents and families on the development of faith in the next generation. So we are people who come alongside children's ministers, youth ministers, all those age segregated ministries of discipleship and formation, which for the most part aren't working the way they used to a generation ago. And we've been for 25 years preaching the message that parents matter and matter most, and what happens at home and in families and in daily life is powerfully shaping and powerfully forming for formation, very much more than whatever we might do in our programs at church. And we never talked about calling, though. So we realized that we had, and we always had parents reacting, and ministry leaders too, oh, we're just throwing more things on them, and we're expecting parents to do even more. And we discovered in the course of this grant how all that changes when parents come to see their role as a parent as a gift and a calling from God. And their role as faith nurturers is a part of their calling as parents and people who are creating families together. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful gift to us to get to do this work. And we think it has changed us as an organization and how we approach our mission. And so having said all that, and that gets to be what I get to do, is mining all that and then helping develop resources out of that. I'll now turn it over to Jim, who can tell you about the other thing that Vibrant Faith does.
Well, I want to share actually a couple things related to our initiative with the culture of calling first. And that is, we assembled a team of 6 coaches that helped shepherd our initiative with 24 different congregations of different, all through geographically across the country and different denominations. But there was a couple key pieces that I think are important to note. As coaches and as a vibrant faith team, we actually needed to understand what calling meant for us personally and collectively. And because we just really felt like we couldn't coach to it till we actually understood it and embedded it in our own life. And so then also as we rolled it out, we really worked with the leadership teams from these 24 churches to help them understand it, embrace it, see how it shows up in their life. And then it was much easier then to translate it and expand it into the rest of the congregational culture. So I left that up that the people leading it need to get it. And so often we don't allow them enough time to do that, to tell their own stories, to reflect on it. But I think that was a real critical element for us. And because our coaches were immersed in it and lived it out and saw the value of it, they could help the leaders do that. And then it really, I think, took on a transformational, had a transformational impact with these congregations. Another key element that I noticed in the initiative was how people embrace both the individual callings. So often we found that if a person wasn't like a rostered leader, an ordained pastor or priest, they didn't think they had a calling. So for them to individually say, I have not only one call, but maybe multiple callings at the same time. And then to understand that there's a shared or collective call on behalf of a congregation, that was really powerful. But I have to say, it profoundly shaped how people understand God, the work of the Spirit in their lives, how God might use them. And I come from a Lutheran tradition. We talk about the priesthood of all believers. To me, I don't think we could live into that to help people be that living expression of Jesus Christ in the world unless they really have a fundamental understanding of what calling means in their life. So I just know that we kind of have to live it and embed it before we can actually talk about it and help others do the same. The other advantage that we had, I think, with the 6 coaches and the coaching team we had, and then working with the different churches, there was constant, what I would say, feedback from what was going on, what was working for a congregation, not working for a congregation. So the coaches resourced each other as they also resourced the churches. And so I want to lift up this important element that not only would you have some of the wisdom that came out of our initiative, but also how do coaches help draw out the wisdom of your existing congregations and your church leaders that will be part of this process. Because that's a real critical element. We understand that coaches are not the experts. They are the ones that draw upon your expertise, your wisdom, your imaginations, and help you do a better job of living into that. So, and we walked alongside these congregations for a period of, 3+ years. And I just want to lift up that it takes about 6 months before kind of people get it and organize themselves well. But then we had monthly meetings with every one of the congregations and really focused on what's the big picture. And then in particular, what's the next step? What are the 2 or 3 things we can do in the next month to keep moving it forward? And then our coaches would meet as a team once a month to share our learnings, share the progress of the congregations, to do some, kind of case studies. Well, this one's stuck here. How can we help them? And learn from the wisdom of the group and come back and share things. But I really felt the gift of coaching was we help people stay focused on what mattered. We helped them ask the right questions, and we helped them continuously move forward. And that would be my hope, in whatever way that would be most helpful for you, that you would see some of those tangible benefits.
Yeah, if I could just say one more thing. And I think what was really fun to watch was the way that the coaches were able to engage deeply with their congregations. And we were pretty task oriented of, you have chosen a plan and we want to help you put that in place. However, in addition to that, there were all kinds of benefits of that coaching relationship for the life of the church. And so it wasn't just the task or the plans of the calling grant, it became way bigger than that. And lots of the churches discovered all kinds of things about themselves that they hadn't paid attention to, or discovered things that desperately needed changing before they could really put things in place, and were able to make those changes. So it was this very fluid process that that was about an activity, grant activity, but way more than that in the life of many, many, many of these congregations.
One last comment I would make is our coaches realized that every ministry setting, every church was going to have a different context. And therefore, how calling showed up, it was going to be different. And I just want you to know that in the calling process, for example, the churches here, that's going to look different in Boulder than it does in Winnipeg, than it does in Spokane. And so this is not just a cookie cutter approach. Everyone does everything the same way at the same time. There's a huge amount of flexibility to really meet the specific needs of the congregation.
This is so helpful. Let's stop and just see if there are any questions at this point. Otherwise, I'll move us forward. Maura, I see you're joining us also from Pax Christi.
Oh, okay.
If you don't have specific questions, what I'd like to do is ask Jim and or Nancy, and let me just apologize. You can probably hear the hum behind me. It's my laundry. I'm sorry about that. So I'll mute as soon as I ask my question. I would like people to be able to really picture like what coaching is like. And so could you discuss how it differs from other things that people know about, like getting a consultant to come, or meeting with a therapist, or, like we have these other buckets of helping people, but could you describe what the coaching relationship is like?
And I'll offer a couple of things and invite Nancy to share as well. First of all, coaching, and the actual definition of, because we're part of an ICF, it's called International Coaching Federation organization that abides by certain rules. But one of the fundamental understandings and beliefs of a coach is that we are actually not the experts. It's the people in the congregations, the people we work with are the experts. And it's our job is to draw out their wisdom, to draw out their imaginations, to draw out their plans and what their ministry roadmap and how they move forward it looks like. So it's really a process, first of all, of building on what's already present. So often we focus on what we lack rather than what's present. And coaching will name what's present, help define reality, help clarify what a preferred future would look like for the congregation or the individuals involved. But in essence, the congregation's doing the work and they're providing the wisdom and the expertise. Our job is simply to help pull together all the pieces and put it in a workable form that allows them to move forward. So I want to lift up that part that we're really not the experts, even though we come with a lot of expertise that sometimes helps shape the questions, but ultimately we're tapping into what's already present in your congregation, which also means the decisions you make and the ideas you make are really going to be from your context, not something that worked out on the West Coast and we think it should work in your church. So that's a real critical element. The other part I just want to lift up is coaching always talks about, in fact, we'll say that you don't have a coaching conversation unless something has changed. And where most people use a coach is simply either they're stuck or they're not making progress towards where they want to go. And we advocate that through coaching, you actually move forward faster because there's accountability. We've helped you identify some different ways to move forward that you might not have considered before. We're helping you think out loud and prepare and actually specifically map out what needs to happen before we meet next month if you meet on a monthly basis. So know that there's a very strong intentionality about specific steps to move forward. We don't just talk about it and discuss it, we actually do it. And the coaches help build in the accountability and the specific resources that allows you to take those steps consistently month after month. Nancy, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, yeah, just to speak to, Jane's specifics. So just from what Jim described, you can hear the difference between that and something that, like therapy for individuals, something that comes to fix the past of your church. Coaching is very forward focused. And obviously coaching is very action focused. So this is just not about considering what could be. It's about developing the plans and taking the steps to move forward. And while, another thing that we kind of always compare to is, spiritual directors and spiritual discernment. While it's a very spiritual process, it actually is, and our coaches are all deeply committed Christians. We are not just focused on hearing God. We are focused on hearing God and taking action based on what we've heard. So there's this movement, this forward movement that comes with coaching that we find to be very helpful in the lives of individuals but especially in congregations.
Thank you both. I think, one of the things that I hear that I think is important for our groups is in the whole spectrum of ways that we've been operating vocationally, coaching is very practical, but everything is connected, right? So how you practice affects how you come to know how God is acting among you. But coaching it enters from the practical area. And then you have this rich body of experience then that you can reflect upon theologically in whatever way that's appropriate to your congregation. But it's the ground for a lot of richness to happen, I think, is what I've observed. So if congregations are thinking about working with a coach, like what would they do on the front end? How would they prepare themselves to think about that and to be ready to interview some coaches? So I also want to ask about interviewing coaches, what you pay attention to, but what do you need to do even before you do that to kind of be ready?
I'll give you a couple of questions that I always invite people to think about. Is first one is what can you not do right now that a coach could help you do in the future? Because our goal is not to do what you can do yourself. Our goal is to stretch you beyond that self and overcome maybe where you might be stuck or the obstacles that you have. So sometimes I just like to ask the question, it might seem counterintuitive, but why do you need a coach? And for most people it is, we keep seeing the problems the same way. We need fresh eyes. We need a coach that will help us do that. Or we need someone to kind of give us a little kick to get us moving, not just along, because we're just keep talking about it and we're afraid sometimes of taking the next step. Others, we need some, just simply help us. Sometimes we just need help organizing. We just can't quite figure out how to get our arms around this new initiative and how do we create clarity and a plan to do that. And we ask some really helpful questions to formulate a plan that is actually both strategic as far as really impactful and also a way that moves you forward. So those would be a couple of things I would ask that. I also think you need to ask, how often would you like to meet with a coach? There's some churches that like to meet once a month. It's not unusual for some coaches where they might meet with a team once a month, and then they might have another meeting with either pastors or the leader of that team. But it's not unusual that you have more than one meeting with your coach. One thing that's a little unusual about our congregation, and I would have to say that for all our C3 initiative, cultural calling coaches, we had monthly conversations with the team, fairly frequent one-on-one conversations with the pastor or church leader. And then we were also accessible between meetings by phone or texting or email, just because one of the goals that we want is if you feel like you're stuck, don't wait till the next meeting. let's deal with it sooner so that you have something to celebrate when we meet again the next month. But that's a little bit unusual about our organization, is actually having an ongoing dialogue via email or texting to help people move forward.
And if I could just speak into what to look for when choosing a coach, I'd just love to mention two things. Very important to us as we got started with this grant, and we were seeking coaches for these 24 churches. There were a couple things that we knew would make a huge difference for the churches. So we didn't let the churches interview coaches. We gave them a coach. So you guys are in this unique position of being able to choose your coach. Our churches didn't. But what part of the way we navigated that is we, as much as possible, tried to give each group of churches a coach of their own denomination, because we think having somebody who understands, we come from a liturgical perspective, or we come from a kind of a more word-oriented perspective. Those kinds of theological flavors are really helpful for coaches to know intimately and be able to speak the language of the congregation, even if they're not an exact match. But that was important to us, is that we made sure that our coaches were able to connect deeply with the theology of the churches that they were working with. So that was really important to us in the mix. And then the second thing that became very important to us is we really looked for coaches who had a long experience with working in the life of the church. We thought that was absolutely essential, especially for vocation and calling, to be able to be working with people who understood this theological theme from, as Jim said, from the reality of their own lives, even though kind of none of us really got it as much as we thought we knew beforehand. So it was really important to us to interview people who had a deep, rich life of faith and a whole boatload of ministry experience to bring to the mix with the churches they were working with. And then thirdly, we also decided that we valued the training and the certification process that would come with coming under the umbrella of a coaching federation. There's a lot of coaches out there, you guys. There are a lot of people that they're hanging out their shingles, and maybe they've been trained for half a day, but yeah, so that was an important, just from the start, insight for us, that it matters a lot to be able to say that we are accredited by the International Coaching Federation. That was an important thing for us as we started a school, that we didn't want to be just one more of those church organizations that was training people for a couple days and now they're coaches. And so there's all kinds of things that go with that. And Jim is constantly working on additional resources and continuing education for our coaches, and they have accountability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that all are things that go with it. So I would say those were my people who get your theology and speak your language, people who have deep ministry experience, deep years of ministry experience, and are committed Christians. Not all coaches necessarily are. That doesn't make them bad people. That just doesn't means that they don't get the church in the same way, and especially this whole vocation thing. And then thirdly, what is their coaching experience?
Thank you so much. I have a question. I had a question that I've lost, so I'm going to have to go with a question that I can recall wanting to ask. Darn. Oh, I know what I was going to ask. A lot of our congregations could not tell you, oh, we're having a real problem doing X, because they're mostly moving forward. Like they've all really taken on this project and done very well with it. So, but I still, Jess and I have both felt that a coach as a companion on the way might really help with this stage that everyone is in, because this is for the additional year. And so we were interested in helping congregations kind of sustain this framework that they've set a good foundation for. So they might not be able to say, yeah, we really need a coach to help us solve this intractable problem that we're having. But still, that slightly outside, that outsider who totally gets it, that kind of person might be really helpful just as they move into this next phase of sustainability.
You know, part of that sustainability is making sure that the change you create, it gets anchored so it's still around 5 years from now. So there are we're paying attention to what is consistently said and done, and how are we creating new norms that will perpetuate a culture of calling and not be something after initiative's over, you'd never know that you covered it, 2 years from now. And so that's a critical part, and that's often what gets lost in these initiatives. You get that burst, whether with or without a coach, and then no one's kind of paying attention to it, and they haven't built the systems in to keep paying attention to it, and then it falters. But that's something we pay particular attention to, is creating an ongoing culture of spiritual vitality or calling or whatever people are looking for.
And I guess I would just say we went through the grant with 24 churches, and we ended our time with the grant with 24 churches. And you guys know what it's like in churches, how like people's enthusiasm, and especially with what you guys are dealing with right now with coming back from COVID and all of people's hesitation, et cetera. It's just really hard to stay on track with things that you've planned to do and be. And so our coaches made all the difference in our church's ability to hang with it beyond the initial enthusiasm, and to keep doing the work in year 2 and 3, and even change what the work was in years 2 and 3 as they had some different focuses.
Chris, you had a question.
I do. I have a couple of questions. Is this the right time to ask them? So, I mean, as I'm, first of all, thank you. It's really helpful to just, have this framework of coaching and the coaching that we've had, that and how it's been helpful to us, and how you're helping me see what else, what's next for us. So, and related to that, when I think about the last 2 years that we are just, and this last Sunday was our first Sunday back together in person after closing down again and moving all online right after Christmas. There are so many things that we've had to learn how to do in new ways in the last 2 years. And we are now in this period of reflection. It's like, okay, what just happened? And what did we learn from it? And what are we carrying forward? How are we different as a congregation? And how has ministry changed? Because it has. And we've learned a lot that we want to then think about how is it that we want to sustain. But we're also aware that there's a lot that we're not able to see yet, because the pandemic for us here in Boulder is just one trauma that we've been through as a community. We're coming up on the anniversary of a mass shooting in a grocery store where 10 people were killed. And also 1,054 houses burned to the ground, all the way to the ground at the very end of the year. So as a community, we're pretty traumatized. So how then, what does vocation look like in the midst of carrying that grief, but also, recognizing that we want to keep moving forward. We have more mourning to do, but we've also experienced callings around gun violence prevention and around reckoning with racial injustice and climate action, because that ground was so dry, the fire just spread like a tornado. And the other, so that's one thing. As I think about, really what vocation means in that, and just being really mindful about this this time and capturing and being really attentive to what it is that how the God is moving in our midst now. The other thing is that, you know, even though we've been at this work of vocational calling for a while, there are also facets of our church life that have in some ways remained untouched because we can't do everything at once. And we've been pretty busy doing the things that we've been doing. So one of the things that I'm super excited about what you said about working with parents and with families, because I feel like that's really, season has been so hard for our families, and our parents are exhausted. So how is it that we can draw even more closely alongside them and to figure out what's next? Because one of the things we also know is that Sunday school should not look the way that it has. It's not the right model for faith formation. So I think there were questions in there. Did you hear them?
I'll just share one observation, and that is what I'm hearing is people still are willing to move forward, but they're also tired too. I heard a little bit of that. And I think that's where we really pay attention to the pace. What is doable? What are some tangible ways to move forward without just putting everything on hold, but not to overtax the already limited capacity of people in this time? And I think we just really need to be attentive to that. It also speaks to when people are clear about what transformation we're seeking and how it unfolds, that usually is an energizing piece for them too. I think people are still willing to invest in ways of moving forward. They just want to make sure that if I'm going to invest, it actually makes a difference in people's lives. And we usually really try to help clarify, is this really going to be impactful on people's lives or not? So we want you to be, again, strategic in doing the things that matter and make a difference in people's lives.
Yeah, and Chris, I of course love your enthusiasm for thinking about parents and families, and that actually is something that bubbled up through our grant. We did not go into this grant thinking, oh, we're going to discover that parents are going to find a new way of thinking about themselves in and through this, but it did happen, you know, as we talked about calling and their churches talked about calling in a lot of ways, and we were able to help the churches, the coaches were able to help the churches think in terms of experiments instead of thinking in terms of, we're going to get rid of Sunday school and change our programming and do this. And, you know, it was like, we have this unique opportunity to try one little thing, to enter in with this little experiment for 3 months, for 4 months. And it was much less daunting. And so that was a real gift that the coaches were able to come alongside churches and help them shape their work around experiments.
Thank you all so much. It's something that I heard in this that I think is important for congregations as you're thinking about how you might make use of a coach, is the possibility of the coach helping you focus on a particular area of the church, like youth and families or something like that. So you might ask yourselves, like, where's the pain? That might be with families or with youth. But you might ask yourself, where's the energy? Like, there might be something that's just like bubbling up, but you don't know how to take advantage of that. So that's another way to think about where a coach might work strategically within what's going on in your congregation. It's not just a blanket everything. It might be really strategic like that. I was well, does somebody else have a question? Yeah, Deb, tell them where you're from.
I'm Holy Trinity in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Okay.
I have a question about the coaches. I don't remember if it was Jim or Nancy that mentioned that they can kind of help build kind of that ongoing support. So some of the good things that it's like we were so excited about in the beginning, and maybe we're struggling to kind of keep that maintenance going. Are there specific skills that we should look for in a coach who might be able to, either they have experience of kind of helping churches kind of build that maintenance, making it just part of the life of the church? Or, do we just hope they can help us?
That's good.
One area that I would pay a particular attention to is, does the person understand that they're working with the entire system? Because if you're only just saying, I'm just going to work with young people in the youth and family program and don't think about how worship impacts that, or even your Facebook page, or everything else, all these things contribute to the overall culture that you create. And I would just want whatever coach you choose, that they're thinking system-wide, not just an isolated facet of ministry. Because that's where it goes away. In fact, we talk about, where your culture, where it's sustainable, is that, for example, a lot of churches want to become storytelling churches. They do a really good job during the worship service, but they're not doing storytelling in elected board meetings. They're not doing them in, the confirmation class. They're not doing it in the men's service group, whatever it is. It's kind of like there's so many other rich opportunities. It's not going to stick if you just do it one place. That's where you're doing it a dozen different places when multiple people are being exposed to it. That's what makes a difference. And that's where that systems mindset has to be part of the equation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That helps a lot.
Yeah, Edwin?
Nancy and Jim, thank you so much for spending this time sharing with us. I'm going to ask a question that might put you a bit on the spot, but don't take offense. But I think I'm kind of leveling with you, and I think it's going to express a little bit where I think a lot of us are, which is simply that in the limited amount of time that we all have, maybe what is the argument that you would make of why coaching is worth the time and effort?
First of all, I want to say one piece is that not every congregation or leader is actually ready for coaching. So I want to throw one question back at you, and then I'll share with a couple other insights. And one of those is just simply your churches, your leaders, who's ever going to be a coach has to be willing to explore some new possibilities. They have to be willing to change. And again, we don't want to be connected with a church that just wants to talk about things. We actually want people that are going to take the time to imagine a different future where God might be calling them to do that. So there has to be a willingness to experiment, as Nancy mentioned, and a willingness and openness to change, which also means you have to be willing to take a look at your reality and say, this is no longer working. So I'd say so this has to actually be a good dance both ways, because we don't want to work with a church that really is resistant to change. We want someone that's open. And then the other part is, and I'd say there's really three reasons why people usually select the coach. One is to realize that just simply, we only look down a couple paths. We really need someone to realize we've got 8 possible pathways rather than 2. And they usually can't do that with working just among themselves. They need someone with fresh eyes and new perspective to help bring that out. So I think that's probably the most important and provocative piece. Who else is helping us think beyond what our current angle of vision allows? The second one is, and this is where, especially like working with the C3 initiative, we kind of know what works and what doesn't work. I think actually having a coach with some of that background information where I'll help you move forward faster, because we're thinking about all the questions. I mean, literally we could go by and say, well, this was a roadblock for this church. This was a roadblock. In essence, we removed the roadblocks that allow you to move forward faster. And that's a huge impact in that setting. And then it's that kind of the systems piece, because most people we work with, whether it's a pastor or a program director, they're only thinking through their lens. And we're asking those other questions that all of a sudden permeate the entire culture, not just one facet of your ministry. So those would be a couple of reasons why I would advocate for a coach. Nancy, anything you want to say?
Yeah, I just think, just to reiterate, I think our churches found that they actually saved time by being coached.
Thank you. Great question, Edwin. as you said, I think it was on a lot of people's minds, so thank you. Does someone else have something that you're wishing you could ask? I had another one. So you have to put your hand up fast because I'll jump in. So, I was thinking, like, how should a congregation decide who should work with the coach, whether it's the pastor or this congregational team on this project or the whole congregation? Like, how does that happen? How do they discern that?
I'll give you a couple guidelines that can be helpful. Generally, it works best when a coach is working with, probably I'd say a team of about 5 or 6 or less, just simply consistent communication with a team that's helping shepherd the process on behalf of the congregation or parish. And, but it's not unusual for a coach to be engaging with, for example, most of my coaching conversations involve sometimes a separate conversation with the pastor and then a separate conversation with the leadership team. Because sometimes, I know that if I can coach the pastor or the priest to be an effective leader to that team, that turbocharges everything else too. So and there's different needs based on different people's roles. Sometimes I actually need to tell the pastor, coach them how not to have everyone defer to them and, seek their answers. How do they become just one source of wisdom, not the source of wisdom for their settings? So sometimes we're just coaching people to play their roles really well. That's beneficial for the church. The other piece where we also utilize our coaches in the culture of calling and elsewhere is as you usually develop a few different initiatives, and there's a couple key strategic things. A coach might help the project coordinator of that initiative for 3-4 months as they're doing that experiment. And then you have another experiment and it's a different person, and the coach kind of resources that individual. So I find I help a lot with the overarching process of the coaching initiative, but then I also usually get a little bit more involved with some of the specific initiatives that they've chosen for a short term. And again, we look at what does your church need to move forward. And sometimes I find working with those various parties that allows us to move forward faster.
Thank you. Other questions that are arising among you? I have another question. So, okay. So what kinds of outcomes are appropriate to seek through coaching?
Well, again, those are going to be determined by your congregation, and we would be wanting to assist you in identifying what you're passionate about. If it's connected to the culture of calling, some of the things that are usually helpful is if you've already been working on things, I like to gather that information for people, and then I would probably do it like an introductory, just an interview, just simply tell me about this, tell me about that. How did you select these pieces? And so I think we'd want to find out what you've already decided to invest your energy, and maybe just confirm, were those the right things, or is it the right thing now? It might have been the right thing 2 years ago. But again, we take the lead from the clients. Our goal is to, through the powerful questioning process, is to make sure that you've made good and helpful decisions and maybe haven't left a few other ones out. But obviously there's some basic parameters with the Lily initiative of what you're working towards. And I can't imagine that they wouldn't play a role in kind of helping shape some of those specific outcomes. Nancy, you want to say a little bit more with that, since you kind of manage the grant?
Yeah, each church developed its own outcomes. And so that, Jim's right, that's just a very individualized process. However, I would think where you guys are now, and in this crazy world that has become a part of our lives in the course of this grant, we discovered that almost all of our churches found new callings in and through COVID, which is what you were saying, Chris. That and I would think that would be a part of what you would want to mine perhaps and explore in this phase of your grant work. It isn't as though they dropped everything that they were doing before, but I would say pretty universally they found themselves responding to God in new ways. And so I would think that would be an interesting outcome that might not have been on your radar screen when you started this whole process.
Thank you both. I feel like with each exchange, you open another window that lets a lot of fresh air in. And in COVID, I think there's been a feeling that the windows are closed and we're breathing the same old air. So I really appreciate this. Any responses, questions? You don't have to like come up with a super duper question that's fully formed. If you just like have an inkling of something brewing, please ask Nancy or Jim while we've got them. Final thoughts.
I just want to say thank you. There's been something kind of brewing related to our strategic planning process around families and parents and youth and kids and what's next. And you've helped me. That's coming more into focus just in this last hour. So I'm going to a meeting tonight and I'll be taking this with me. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
It's one piece of really what we had identified as a priority, but this, I felt like you have helped us now move that along the next step.
Well, and I really appreciate the thinking about and that a coach could help us at Holy Trinity. Jim, you know, one of the things that we are working on is that our congregation wants to feel more connected and they want to know each other better. And so it's just allowing me to think of, you know, having a coach who can really help us expand that thought process and expand the areas in which that happens. So that for me is just invaluable. So thank you so much.
Jim or Nancy, any final thoughts?
I'm going to just offer one comment. We haven't really talked about the vehicle for coaching. Obviously, Zoom is one of those. That's been one of the primary ways. Still use the old-fashioned phone too for other ones, but I do want you to know that in our initiative and a lot of coaching we do, and again, given what's situation with COVID, but we also do meet in person or do on-sites as part of this process. And sometimes that can be just really helpful to see firsthand the energy, the vitality, what people say and do, and the traffic flows. And so we are open to coming to your ministry settings, not just doing it via Zoom, if that's something that would be helpful.
That's great. Thank you. And you have coaches all over the nation, actually. So that's another piece of perhaps, you know, making a discernment about a coach.
Yeah. Actually, I've been to Justice Victor a number of times, and I believe there was a couple different Holy Trinities, but I think I've been to your congregation too. So I'm from Minneapolis. So yeah, but you're right. We have coaches across the country.
Well, thank you all for your time. And this is not the end of asking questions of Vibrant Faith. So, you know, if you have other questions, you know, we can relay them or you can, and we will, as we said, some of you are already working with a coach and might want to continue with that person, or you have someone that your denominational group recommends that you use because of where you are. Those are separate, but if you're interested in working with Vibrant Faith, we'll continue these conversations and start working out a path forward for discerning a good coach for you. And thank you so much for being here today, to Nancy and Jim. I really appreciate just the way in which with each question you like opened up another realm of either reality or possibility or the two working together that I hadn't thought of. So thank you.